Welcome back to the Torque Test channel. This is episode 23, and today we have the Aircat 1250K, Aircat's biggest, most expensive, and our most requested model. This tool will help round out Aircat's offering on this channel, as we've tested the 1256 XL Compact, the always popular 1150 Killer Torque, and the 1178 Vibrotherm, which brought all the torques, then went home early when they were supposed to design a trigger. This 1250K's design and how it operates is like nothing else we've tested on this channel so far, to be honest. So today we're going to show why that is, test it on our dyno as usual, and graph its power, then rank it at the end of this video versus the competition. On this channel we test modern power tools versus old school torque ratings. Essentially assuming your father's impact wrench made an honest 450 foot-pounds, what do modern impacts really make compared to that? Manufacturers admit there's really no way to compare torque ratings, so in a world where brands are now advertising 1,715 foot-pounds on a half-inch impact, this is our attempt at leveling the playing field. It won't disprove the brand's ratings, but it will allow us to actually compare power levels across brands for the first time. This particular 1250K was provided to us by a kind viewer. If you would like to suggest we test your impact wrench, leave a comment below. We just have a couple screening questions that we think would weed out the possibility of a brand sending us a hopped up version to test. Hall of Fame viewer John Duh reached out to us about a Makita high torque. We got to talking and he wanted to send us his 1250K first because while it had the power, it felt maybe funny to him while in use. And don't worry, that Makita high torque is coming. Well, as it turns out, the reason it felt funny to him while he's using it, which he described as it being overeager to impact on a bolt even if it was somewhat loose, is also what makes this impact wrench unique. It's Aircat's twin clutch model. But what does that mean? All of the air impact wrenches we've tested so far on this channel have been single or twin hammer mechanisms like the 1150 Killer Torque we tested. A twin hammer works like this. The hammer cage is spun around by the air motor, and then each full revolution, the two hammers strike simultaneously on the wings of the anvil. This whole assembly is completely stopped temporarily by this process, which is an efficient transfer of sort of the impact force through the anvil and the whole mechanism, compared to, say, a cordless tool whose ball and cam mechanism that strikes and then slips under spring pressure to keep moving and not stall out the electric motor, which is something electric motors don't like. This 1250K, on the other hand, uses a rarely used, at least today, mechanism called a twin clutch, or traditionally a pin clutch. It appears all of Aircat's tools that end with a -K have the same type of mechanism. With this design, the cage is driven by the motor, just like the twin hammer design, but what's different is inside there's pins that are raised once a revolution by a cam riding on a ball bearing akin to a cordless tool. Then a spring is used to return the pins back down for the next revolution, also sort of like a cordless tool, but the assembly is allowed in this case to nearly come to a full stop first and transmit all that power and also reduce a lot of the forces and vibrations that you might get from a cordless tool. Cordless tools sort of fight against your wrist as much as it does the impact cage when the spring is resetting. Here's a look at those pieces that's inside of the Aircat. This is the hammer cage. Then you have this hardened piece the ball bearing rides on. That goes into the cage. Then the ball bearing. This is allowed to ride around on that inside piece, the inside groove, while it's lubricated with oil. We'll get into that in a second. Then the cam goes in, which is the part that carries and pushes up the hammer pins with each revolution to strike the anvil. So the pins need to go in with it at the same time. Then you have the spring, and then you have the anvil goes inside, which sort of does the business end of things. Now, since this mechanism is a bit different than what we've seen thus far, it also takes a different type of lubricant than the impacts we've tested so far as well. Instead of molybdenum grease, this tool's hammer assembly takes a motor oil, 1 ounce of 5W30 in this case. Because of our viewers' suspicion of this tool, even though it was quite new, we did change out the oil on this one, which did pick up about 3% power, nothing significant, and its internals did look quite new. In this case, a funnel doesn't work super well because the fill hole size is quite small. So we recommend getting a syringe or a small plunger to fill this. Getting into this 1250K's specs for a second before testing, it advertises 950 foot-pounds of max torque and 1300 foot-pounds of loosening torque, which is like Aircat's nut busting. Pretty up their stats, but as we touched on in the Vibrotherm video, Aircat's power specs don't really make sense to anyone, not even us. The 1150 Killer Torque advertises 900, and 1295 loosening, so exactly 5 foot-pounds less on the loosening spec. Then the Vibratherm advertises the exact same 950 1300 specs as the 1250, but it's shorter than both the 1150 and a lot shorter than our 1250K here, somehow. Speaking of length, yeah, at 8¼ inches long, the 1250 is a big boy. It's actually tied in length with the DP we tested, and while the DP always loves company, as everyone knows, if you want to follow up performance after DP, you got to be willing to get your hands dirty, and it may leave some people with a bad taste in their mouth. So as Gail Banks says, let's bang this turkey. This is the first of our tests, which is a 5-second forward working torque. We'll show how the top scoring Vibratherm stacks up against the 1150 first, and then we'll jump into the 1250K. So yeah, making a lot more than the 1178 Vibratherm is pretty big news in this case because 1178 scored so highly before this 1250 came along. This is forward so far, but still, even when comparing against this Milwaukee High Torque, which is our highest scoring forward 5-second test so far, they basically meet at the end, but in between, this 1250 is still making more power up till then. So that seems pretty significant to us. Our next test is our max torque test, which is 10 seconds in reverse. So here's that. So in this 10-second test, they both make quite a bit more than 1150, but they also both match each other's power quite a bit. The 1250 making 626 and the Vibratherm making 634. But I think what's more interesting, which we haven't really shown yet, is just how smooth and balanced the 1250K is. For how much the marketing of the Vibratherm went into and on about the balance and the hammer cage and how everything's connected directly to each other to eliminate vibrations, they already had a model, this 1250K, that was the most balanced and smoothest impact we've tested yet. It's probably more indicative of the hammer mechanism differences between the two, and the Vibratherm likely is a very balanced twin hammer tool. But overall, this 1250 is still tops when it comes to just smoothness of impact delivery. So our last test is the 15-second reverse, best case scenario. Here it is. So this one was interesting to us. Obviously, we knew the 1178 Vibratherm was a top scoring impact on this 15-second test. It took the top spot when we tested it, but we didn't expect the 1250 to be such a dramatic difference, especially after seeing the first two tests you just watched. But it's also kind of cool. At the 7, 8, 9-second mark, the 1250 is sort of done making more power, which is interesting and maybe indicative of the specific impact mechanism it uses. But that's also kind of useful. If you had a choice between a tool making all of its power in the first 8 seconds and all of its power in 15 seconds, you would probably choose the first one. No one's really holding onto these for 15 seconds unless they have a long threaded stud that's rusted they're trying to remove. So from a performance aspect, we think it's cool that the 1250 makes all this power early. It does in forward, it does in reverse, because that's probably good at busting rusted bolts free, especially compared to these two Aircats we're showing here. But on a test like this and with our ranking system, maybe it's not tailor-made for, putting up the highest points that we've ever seen. So it suffers in that regard, but it does bring the power if you can really accept it being 8¼ inches long. So speaking of rank, let's see where it ranks. So this is our full-size rank list, and the Aircat at 8.25 inches definitely qualifies for full size. So its torque scores go here, and that gets turned into points. So 569 becomes 57, 63, 68. And then it's quite a long impact wrench, as you know, at 8.25 inches long. So its top torque divided by its length equals 82.4 points. And then as far as its torque claim goes, it's 950 foot-pounds is what its advertised max is, which is a bit high compared to what it's able to make ultimately. And so that becomes 72 points, 72% of its 950. And then at $209, it's sort of middle of the range cost, but it did make pretty good power. So that gets turned into 48.8 points, which is pretty decent in the category, not one of the lower ones. So what is that total and how does it rank? 391.2 points, or 5th place, right below the $520 Matco Air Impact. So I wouldn't call it a bad company to be with. It's just we got a lot of heavy hitters on this list. And when you think about it, among the impacts that you can actually buy, considering the Vibratherm's trigger issue and the SMA impact you can't buy and the Matco's cost, this would actually be our suggestion for an air impact on this full-size list if you can stomach the length of the tool. Our next couple episodes will be cordless episodes, rounding out some of the categories we wanted to add to. But our next air tool impact is going to be the famous Ingersoll Rand 2235 Ti Max that many of you requested, and we're finally going to get there. So stick around, subscribe, and thanks for watching.